My name is Andres Lepik. I'm the director of the Architecture Museum in Munich, and I'm happy that you are all here to listen to an outstanding lecture that is part of our lecture series or event series that we created along the exhibition Who's Next? Architecture, Homelessness, and the City. And this exhibition so far is in Munich major success. Of course, this special situation in the pandemic times. We have now, in the last week of this exhibition that will close on Sunday the 6th, we have already 20,000 visitors, which is really for us more than we expected, because everybody has to follow the 2G plus rule. So, or being, since last week's even visitors are accepted who are like boosted and so on. So it's very, very limited, but as I said, a lot of interest, a lot of success, and also specifically on the weekends, on Sundays, when we have a €1 entrance fee, we counted in our exhibition, in this exhibition, more than 1,000 people every Sunday in the last weeks. Wow. So I think that's really an amazing, let's say, sign that there is a public interest in this topic, and it's, I think, very, very broadly appreciated. And we are giving tours almost every day. And Daniel Telesnik, the curator of the exhibition, more than I am doing it. But I think it's also within these tours, we get many really great responses, questions, additional information. So we see this exhibition more as a platform, not so much as the final statement about anything. It's more a process that we started with a seminar in the Technical University almost 2 years ago. So with architecture students, we started to do some research about, so what does homelessness mean to the cities? And they started with the German-speaking countries. From that, Daniel, as a curator, grouped a lot of international experts in the field to bring some information out of these cities, these 8 global cities. And then step by step, we developed an exhibition that was then also in the final part, very much designed by students, so by architecture students, with doing the models, sometimes the models of the buildings, sometimes the detail models of specific rooms. So I think it's an exhibition that takes up on a social argument, but focuses on the architecture as a possible instrument to contribute to politics in a very dire situation at this moment. And to finish it up, my 2 words, that we all know that the situation of homelessness in the world has been pre-corona times already a very, very tough situation. And during the pandemic, it has increased its urgency, and it's a humanitarian catastrophe. And even in countries like in the European Union, where there is a welfare system, we have very many problems related to homelessness. So without further ado, I want to pass the microphone to Daniel Telesnik, the curator of the exhibition, who will then fully introduce Leilani. And thank you, Leilani, here already that you were willing to contribute, and you were a great inspiration for us after your conference that we attended last year. Unfortunately, also only online. So one day we want to get you here to Germany to talk to us in this real space. Thank you, and Daniel, take it away.
Thank you, Andres, and thank you, Leilani, for being here, and thank you, Sarah, for helping us to coordinate this event. I'm not going to talk in detail about the exhibition, but show you a little bit what type of materials and what did we do in each of the different rooms in the exhibition. This is, of course, our exhibition poster with Star Apartments by Michael Maltzan in Los Angeles. And this is a view from our museum from the outside, where the exhibition is announced, with one of 13 of this advertisement columns or Litfaßsäule. 10 of them are inside the museum, but 3 of them are in the neighborhood where we have the museum, also not only promoting but contributing to exhibit the exhibition material. This is the entrance to our museum, where we see a model done by students of our school of Star Apartments and the Litfaßsäule that is in that room. This is the opening space already inside the exhibition, with this image of San Francisco at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, with those tents in the first sanctioned encampment in the city. The first room of the exhibition, where we study 8 cities around the world, cities that are not in Europe, where we asked teams of researchers in every city that we worked with to tell us a biography of the city from the point of view of homelessness, to tell us about a specific topic related to homelessness in that city, and to also give us some statistics so that we could compare and understand how the problem has been either increasing or developing in each of these cities. This is the second room of the exhibition, where we ask specifically, what can architecture do? What are the roles that architecture can take? We exhibit 19 housing projects from around the world, and we explain why each of them is interesting to understand this or that dimension from design in relationship to projects that try to house people that were previously unhoused. This is the third and last room of the exhibition. There is the study of 10 cities in Germany that we did also with another class of students from the TU. In the middle of the room, you see the library of the exhibition. And this is an image of the back wall of the exhibition with some statistics of Munich. One of the 3 films we originally commissioned. There are other 3 films that we have in the exhibition that we found: Down and Out in America from 1986, What It Takes to Make a Home, done by the Canadian Centre for Architecture from 2019, and a film in London by Matthew Hall. The exhibition design was done by Carmen Wolf, a Munich architect, and the graphic design by Catherine Gilmore. This is the last wall of the exhibition, of the way you go through the exhibition, where we did a map of Munich with what you could say is an alternative understanding of our city from the point of view of institutions that work and help people that are dealing with homelessness. We have a catalog that we published with Architango, and this is the outline of the book of the German edition. And all this brings us to Leilani Farha, our guest today, who wrote a foreword for us. Leilani Farha is the former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing and the global director of The Shift. Her work is animated by the principle that housing is a social good, not a commodity. Leilani has helped develop global human rights standards on the right to housing, including through her topical reports on homelessness, the financialization of housing, informal settlements, rights-based housing strategies, and the first UN guidelines for the implementation of the right to housing, 3 of which are in our exhibition library. She is the central character in the documentary PUSH regarding the financialization of housing, which has been screening around the world. Leilani launched The Shift in 2017 with the UN Office of the Higher Commissioner for Human Rights and the organization United Cities and Local Government. I want to welcome Leilani to this online event. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Daniel and Andres. It's a distinct pleasure to be here, but I would be lying if I didn't say that I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to join you in Munich all this time and to see the exhibit in person. I did take the virtual tour, which was fantastic. And of course, I have the catalog, but again, a big disappointment, but I hope to join you sometime in the not too distant future. And I want to start by just a huge congratulations to you both for such an important exhibition that you've put on, or exhibit that you put on. I want to start my comments by taking a global look at homelessness in the last 3 weeks. A week ago, a so-called cleanup crew arrived in Inglewood, Los Angeles. They were there to remove homeless people who were living under a bridge near SoFi Stadium, where the Super Bowl will be played, the American football match, and the second most watched sporting event in the world. The residents were provided with little notice, and many lost precious belongings and had nowhere to go. California has the 5th largest GDP in the world. Tickets for the Super Bowl cost between $4,000 and $60,000 US. Earlier this week, reports out of India exposed homeless people in Delhi struggling to stay warm during an exceptionally cold and rainy spell, with over 150 homeless people dying since the new year. India has the 7th largest GDP in the world and a rapidly growing economy at 8%. There are an estimated 1.5 million homeless people in India, and yet only approximately 500 emergency shelters across the country. In Canada, emergency shelters for homeless people are experiencing COVID-19 outbreaks, putting them at grave risk of death. This is a population that is under-vaccinated and where they often have underlying health conditions as a result of their homelessness, making them extremely vulnerable to poor outcomes from COVID. But when homeless people erect tents in cities and in parks across the country, they face brutal eviction. Canada has the 10th largest GDP in the world and one of the highest rates across the planet of vacant homes. In Port Harcourt, Nigeria, the oil-rich area of Africa's most populous country, the homes of 2,000 fishermen, civil servants, traders, teachers, school kids, artists were demolished without notice, without consultation, and without a relocation plan. An entire vibrant community rendered homeless. Nigeria only has the world's 26th largest economy, but is known for corruption and the storing of capital offshore. In my travels, I have been overwhelmed by the realities of what it means to live in homelessness, by what I have seen, by what I have heard. The world over, homeless people are regarded as dirty, lacking morals, and burdens on society. They are often subject to extreme forms of sexual violence and violence based in hate. They are referred to in derogatory terms: cockroaches, vermin, pigeons, and other pests to be exterminated. They are denied access to water and sanitation and criminalized, stigmatized, and discriminated against for engaging in activities that are necessary for their own survival, such as eating and sleeping in public spaces. They are treated like human waste, forced to establish their households on or next to a garbage dump, for example. They hang onto life by the thinnest thread. I have to say, I am baffled. How did we get here? How did we get to a place where it's acceptable for people, even in the richest nations, to live without a toilet, a bed, without running water, exposed to preventable disease? How did we get to a place where we judge people based on their housing status? How did we get to a place where we not only abandon the most vulnerable people on the planet, but where we vilify, discriminate against, and criminalize and imprison them for sleeping, eating, and defecating, for simply trying to survive? How did we get to a place where laws and policies create homelessness and then penalize homeless people for being homeless? How did we get to a place where a secure, affordable home is increasingly an entitlement for fewer and fewer households, for numbered corporations, for pension funds, and for shareholders, but not for everyday people? And how did we get to a place where all of this happens with little, if any, government accountability? Homeless people have told me, often through tears, that more than any material security, what they yearn for is to be seen, to be recognized and treated by society as human beings with inherent dignity and with respect. We must resist the urge to blame the victim. You see, if there were just several hundred homeless people worldwide, we might reasonably conclude that homelessness is about the bad choices or the bad luck of a few. But when millions of people worldwide are sleeping rough, doubled up with family and friends in overcrowded housing, living with a violent partner, or in squalor with no legal rights to their homes, we know that there is more at play than individual pathologies. It suggests that decisions of the highest order are being taken and societies are being created through acts, big and small, that produce homelessness. My work has led me to understand that part of the problem is the unswerving view by governments aligned with mega financial actors, among others, actors like the IMF, central banks, regional banks, private equity firms, asset management firms, that governments aligned with those actors view housing as a commodity, something for the rich to invest in, trade, and solidify their privilege, rather than treating housing as a human right to which poor and low-income people are entitled. The simple truth is that homelessness is the failure of states to protect and implement housing as home and the human right to housing. And as I said, they do so with impunity. This tyranny of the haves over the have-nots could have ended with the pandemic, should have ended with the pandemic, a pandemic that starkly revealed the importance of home, a pandemic against which the only protection offered by governments back in March 2020 was that we all stay home if you had one. I was convinced that in the face of this once-in-a-generation crisis, governments would finally recognize the existential threat caused to societies by not addressing homelessness. Instead, what's happened? By all accounts, homelessness has actually increased in cities across the world at rates that are actually in stride with the rise in riches and wealth across the world. Just today, Blackstone, the largest private equity firm in terms of residential real estate, reported that they have had the most remarkable results in their history of existence in one particular quarter of 2020. So while the world was suffering and people were losing their homes and falling into homelessness, Blackstone had its most remarkable quarter, driven by results in real estate investments, nearly doubling its net income in just 3 months. The solution to all of this, in my opinion, is that homeless people need to be visible. This will require governments to invite homeless people back into their conception of the human family, to recognize their inherent dignity and their equal and inalienable rights, to give them a seat at the proverbial table. And it means more. It will require homeless people to show up in unusual spaces and places, like architecture museums. And that's the vision of Daniel and Andres, to whom I am so grateful for having the courage and the creativity to make this exhibit, Who's Next, happen. To me, the exhibit is a wake-up call to the unacceptable phenomenon of homelessness. It portrays graphically, even on the floor of the museum itself, life as a person living in homelessness. And it recognizes and portrays the complexities of homelessness without giving up on solutions. It is a revelation of what is being done through architecture to both harm and assist people living in homelessness, from architecture that is hostile, such as benches that prohibit people from lying down, to case studies which demonstrate what architecture can do to bring people indoors, to make visible a population, and to bring dignity and respect, cornerstones of human rights, to an otherwise forgotten population. I think Who's Next is actually a radical exposition, particularly the idea that homeless people are, in fact, equally deserving of living in beautiful spaces designed and created by architects, and that the housed and the houseless must be integrated if we are going to live in a full, peaceful, and inclusive society. To me, Who's Next is an important conversation starter, a point of departure. It's a place from which we might imagine, quite concretely, a different and better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leilani. What I would suggest is that I have a couple of questions prepared, and that we could also, after you entertain these questions, we could open up to the audience. They could write to us as of now, any questions that they have for you, and I could transmit them to you. I wanted to start with another question, but after what you've talked, I think I'm going to change the order of things. You're writing reports for the UN, the latest of which I believe was in 2020, if I am not mistaken. And you suggest in them the prevention of evictions, advocate for housing rights, and such topics as we learned from your bio when I presented you. What I wanted to ask to you is, what are the effects of these guidelines? Do you have any way of understanding how they are received? Who reads them? Are they distributed throughout all of the governments that are members of the UN and so forth? If you could introduce us to this dimension of these reports that you write.
Sure. So, I mean, there's many things that a rapporteur does, and one of them is when I was rapporteur, all rapporteurs are required to write 2 thematic reports a year. And I chose, as rapporteur, I was pretty strategic. I decided that governments need help in understanding what the right to housing means and how they can govern using the right to housing, how they can make laws and policies that implement the right to housing. I don't consider governments to be evil or anything. I consider them to be somewhat ignorant sometimes, ignorant of the relationship between what they're doing over here in their finance ministry and what they're doing over there in their social welfare ministry. And so I felt it was my job and responsibility as a rapporteur to kind of breathe life into the right to housing, but make it very concrete for them. And so that's why my final report as rapporteur was a set of guidelines for the implementation of the right to housing. They do get distributed to all states, member states of the UN. And it is expected that at least the members of the UN Human Rights Council would read those thematic reports and that report. I actually have received a tremendous amount of very positive feedback from a variety of sectors, including government, saying that that it is a very practical and useful resource. It's the guidelines are divided up, as you mentioned, Daniel, in particular categories. So what I'm finding is some governments will just grab the section that's related to what they're working on, which is fine, although I wish they would look at this as a whole. But for example, I'm working right now with a city in Canada that's grappling with homelessness. And so they're looking at the section in the guidelines that are dealing with homelessness and what should they do as a city to address homelessness. That it just happens there's a tent encampment in a park, and they tried to evict them, and that obviously was unsuccessful because people just move to another park if they have nowhere to go. And so they're now actually sitting down with these human rights guidelines among other tools. The Shift, my organization, we've used the guidelines to inform a lot of our interactions with NGOs. Even NGOs don't know how to do the right to housing. So, for example, we've been working with some groups in Zimbabwe who have the Zimbabwean government just adopted a new housing policy, and it has elements of the human right to housing, but we're using the guidelines to help them encourage the government to really infuse this policy with human rights intentions and outcomes. So it's that sort of thing that we do at the Shift, not just with the guidelines. We have other standards that we've created ourselves at the Shift that we also use with governments and other stakeholders.
Thank you for such a comprehensive and precise answer at the same time. You mentioned a little bit what can architecture do? You mentioned bringing people indoors and some general notions, but I wanted to insist on this question. In your opinion, what can architecture, the architecture field and design related fields do for this topic? We understand, and we say it in the exhibition, that architecture or architecture alone cannot solve homelessness. But of course, we also understand that it can contribute in several ways. But from your opinion, because you're not coming from architecture or design related fields, actually, you have a completely other profession. You could tell us about that too. From your opinion, what are these things that architecture could contribute to this big discussion?
Yeah. I love this question because I'm such an outsider, so I can just, send things your way, and it's for you to decide and determine and chew on whether it's anything that you think is possible within the architectural sector or architect sector. Here's a little story, and I'll try to keep it brief. But when I was in New York, I had occasion to visit the High Line, which many of you will know. This is the railroad tracks that were converted into an outdoor above ground level park. You can walk along, it's about 2 kilometers long. And all along this High Line, which it's really lovely, there are these architecturally designed and refurbished buildings. And I was reading an interview with the guy whose vision it was to create this High Line out of these abandoned railroad tracks. And someone had said to him, to what do you attribute the success of the High Line? They get as many visitors on the High Line as the Louvre gets in any given year. Okay, so it's a very well visited tourist destination. And the guy said, well, it is successful, it's amazing, blah, 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 but is it really a success? And the interviewer was a little bit surprised. Why would you say that? And he said, well, when we designed this, and it is, it is a designed garden. It's landscape designed by some of the leading landscape architects out there. He said, when we designed this, we asked the wrong question. We asked, what could we do with these railway lines? And we should have asked, what does this community need? And the community he was referring to was the low-income community on either side of the High Line, living in public, or what we would call social housing. And so for me, I took that, and I think that's something that architects can take back to themselves. In every project you're involved in, it's really important to ask the right questions. And those questions are about, how am I contributing to inequality and lack of diversity, exclusion and displacement? Or you can flip it and say, how am I contributing to equality and community and cohesion and allowing for diversity? So I think that's just, I'm a human rights lawyer. Of course, I have to ask myself that question every time I'm engaged. How is my practice benefiting or not benefiting the people I'm working with? And I think that goes for you too. Even if it seems as architects somehow remote, even if what you're building has nothing to do with housing per se, ask yourself, is the result of my engagement in this project the gentrification of this neighborhood and the displacement of, along the High Line, if you've heard of Hudson Yards, that is one of the most expensive now pieces of real estate in New York. And as a result, all of the shops are catering now to that clientele. The shops are catering to tourists on the High Line, which means people living in public housing have no grocery store to go to. It's that practical. Milk is now way more expensive, right? So, and if architects had said, wait a second, we need to make sure that, okay, we might build a stellar building along here, a beautiful building, but what are we going to give back? How are we going to give back? What percentage of the property taxes of these buildings are actually going to go back to the community? Those are things. And the other thing I'll say about some architects is, you're a highly respected profession, highly respected, far more than human rights advocates like me, who are viewed as a thorn in the side. And I think you need to use your status when you're often you'll be engaged with city officials, right? As you do your projects, I imagine. Use that status and that privilege to ask them the hard questions. Ask them what's their vision that promotes or doesn't promote human rights, for example, or social cohesion.
I like the example so much because it's not a housing example. It affects housing projects, of course, but it's also an example of the privatization of public space.
Exactly.
And as you were saying, okay, we could complete that. It's a destination. It has few access points. It raised the price of property in the neighborhood, so it benefited the people that promoted it more than the people that perhaps were. So I thank you for that answer. We have a question from the audience, Tina Steingräber, who's our publisher, actually. She asks, if you could please let us know if there is a good, quote unquote, role model for government from your perspective, of a government from your perspective.
Yeah, the best example is Finland by far. I mean, Finland leads in so many ways, and we should ask ourselves, why is that? It's not just that they have a good housing policy. The question is, how did they come up with a good housing policy? And I think it goes to this idea of asking good questions. I think it goes to being lateral thinkers. If you're friends with Finns, you know, they come at things sort of sideways. I don't know how to describe it, but they often have they're willing to look at things, to turn over stones and look under. And that's what they did with homelessness, for example. So they have a constitutional right to homelessness, as do most European nations. So that was a good legal basis, but then they had to breathe life into it. And they were struggling with homelessness and they made a political commitment to end homelessness. So they set about doing that, and they came up with an approach called the housing first approach. So it was basically, let's just get everyone inside, make sure everyone has an adequate home, and then we'll deal with any other and all other social or medical issues at play. So they get people inside, and then if the person needs social supports, if they need some kind of drug rehabilitation, whatever, that's provided to them. So it's kind of a no-nonsense approach, right? Get everyone inside, and then we'll, but it's not. So when they were first rolling that out, they realized, wait, we're not meeting our targets. Why is that? So then they looked again, as I said, under all the stones, and they realized that there were some structural issues that they had to address. And those structural issues were around poverty. So, for example, they realized welfare rates were too low and people were falling into arrears. They couldn't pay their rent and then were being evicted and becoming homeless. So what's the answer to that? Raise welfare rates, right? So, or provide whatever extra supports or rent supplements, or, so Finland is definitely the leading example, and we are at the Shift, and others are trying to convince other governments to take the lead. But I mean, this is a government that is scanning, and probably it hires a whole lot of architects. They're constantly scanning the landscape to find buildings that could be repurposed for the purpose of housing people who need social housing, or who might be homeless, for example. And that's you don't find most cities doing that. I certainly don't in my practice. So that's a whole other level, right? And this idea of repurposing, so they'll take a parking lot and repurpose it. They'll take a motel and repurpose it.
Such an interesting example, which we've also found when we've been in contact with other specialists, that they say, yes, fantastic, it works in Finland, but how could you make it work in other countries? Specifically the idea of housing first that has been so successful there. But when you talk sometimes to local specialists in cities like Leipzig, they say, yeah, that won't work here for this and that and this reason. So as a follow-up question, the experience of bringing successful experiences from one city to others, how do you navigate that, the translation factor, if you will? As the Shift, since you're also, when you say Zimbabwe and you say you have the point of view, you have that central point of view, so to speak.
Well, I mean, this is not a very gracious answer, but everyone thinks they're special and they're not. And, I say that as someone who spent a long time, I'm an Arab Canadian, and I've spent a long time working on the issue of the human right to housing for Palestinians. Palestinians often, think that they are special, and there are many things about their situation that is special. One of the few peoples that live under occupation. However, there are also so many commonalities and parallels between their situation and other situations, and that would be the same where cities are saying to me, "Oh, well, we're special. We couldn't do that." Really? How hard have you tried? Have you put your mind to it? Have you made that political commitment? I mean, if you talk to someone in Finland, they have developed a culture there where homelessness is unacceptable. And so then once you have that in your psyche as a nation, then you go about the business of making sure that this is that your population is happy, right? So if you ask, I mean, in fact, I did it. I spoke with the ambassador to of the Finnish ambassador to the UN, who wouldn't know anything about housing policy. And I was talking to her about how great Finland is and on housing and homelessness. And she laughed. She said, well, it's unacceptable for people to live in homelessness. Just like this. Now, I've never heard another ambassador say that to me, for example. So, I mean, it's a bit of a, as I said, it's not a gracious answer to that question, Daniel, but how special is every city? I mean, I do sometimes worry in my own country that they've let this problem of homelessness go for so long, that it is so entrenched. And if you look in California as well, for example, where it's so embedded that it will take Herculean effort to undo this, probably. But come on, I think there are some Hercules out there.
Again, such an interesting answer, because as Andres mentioned, we do think as this exhibition more as a platform than a source for this is the ultimate answer. It happens to us all the time with the housing examples, when journalists come or visitors and they say, from this 19 projects, which is the one that we should copy? Which is the one that works? Which is the one that I should bring to my city? And we've been insisting since the beginning, and also have talked to many architects that share this opinion, that there's not such a thing as this is the project that can be reproduced everywhere. There is more of this works here for this reason, this works here for this other reason, and we can learn from this.
Let me follow, Daniel, because I think that's an interesting point. And I didn't mean to say that I think everyone can do it the Finnish way. But what is it that you're trying to communicate? When I'm talking to a city in North America or a city in Europe or a city in Africa, what am I trying to communicate to them? What is it about Finland that is so easily replicable? And it's that commitment to the human right to housing. That's what's replicable. And I mean, I do think with homelessness, what are the options? You have to house people, because anything else doesn't meet the human right to housing. So you see, in that way, cities will have to find a way. It may not be by repurposing parking lots. I mean, you're not going to do that in Zimbabwe. They don't have a lot of parking lots in Harare, you know. So that may not be the method by which, but there has to be that commitment. Housing is a human right and everyone has to be housed. That's the Finnish way.
Yeah, because in the European Union has this statement that they will end homelessness, as you know, by 2030. And this was reinforced by the new chancellor here. And we were seeing the local numbers in 10 different cities in Germany. And we can't help but ask ourselves, is this even, how do you make the math? But your answer is so I'm missing a word here, but it's the criteria and this commitment that would come first before any other implementation. Of we're going to do it this way or this other way, or we're going to bring this solution or this other solution, is the commitment to the idea first. And I appreciate how unequivocal your answer is in this case.
It is unequivocal. Yeah. Because it's unequivocal, because why? What's the alternative? Right. We continue to let people die on our streets. For me, it's not an alternative. I mean, that's why, you know, in my more formal comments, I said I'm baffled. I really am baffled. How can we let this continue? Why is it that, you know, okay, we say there's something like, 1.6 billion, 1.8 billion people living in grossly inadequate housing and homelessness, 150 million at least in homelessness. Well, if I told you, I don't know, whatever, the whole population of Germany, for example, no one over the age of 18 or certainly under is allowed to vote any longer. I think you would say to me, oh my God, well, you know, that's a lot of people being denied the right to vote. That's a constitutional issue. That's a human rights issue, right? In this day and age, in light of your level of democracy, in light of the trajectory of Germany, you would be startled. Well, when I say that there's 150 million people around the world living in homelessness, no one reacts to that as if it's a human rights travesty, as if it's that it's something that needs to be ended immediately. That's what we have to change.
Andres, would you like to enter?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanna step in here because I think that what you're saying is really, and we took Finland also always in our tours as the leading example for, because many people are asking us in the tours, so but how could you do it? And then we say, yeah, I mean, there are countries in Europe who are like really leading in that idea, and that's I'm very grateful that you answered so quickly that Finland is it, and like we didn't find any other better example. And I mean, it's clear. I mean, and this is why we're doing this exhibition, because we, as an architecture museum, we think we have to bring this knowledge about the ethical dimension of this question up to the politics, and this can only go through a larger audience. If we have a larger audience and if we address people more, they come to the art museum or to this museum where they don't know what they find, and they see, of course, they see an exhibition and they say, so what is this about? And then they start talking, and we see really a lot with the reactions of our visitors that people are surprised to see this information, because, as you said, it's very much, the situation is very much, let's say, neglected, is overseen, is kind of pushed away from consciousness, and there's always this idea of, yeah, there's a social welfare system, and there's some poor people, and I mean, we experience it in our with our friends. Many people telling us when we're doing this exhibition, so why are you doing this exhibition? Most of them are they don't want to go back, and then we have to start this conversation and saying, like, do you know anything about it? And there's so many prejudices about it, and this is why we did it also. And you know, we cooperated also with the documentary center, this documentation center for the Nazis here in Munich, because it has also in Germany a special dimension when the homeless were had their own star, the black star, as being asocial. Those people who were rejecting to work, and they were like getting, I mean, this is also something that we learned, that they were having their own star, but it's something that we continuously also tell our visitors, and then there is kind of also a very special dimension in Germany. So that was less a question, but more a comment.
No, that's first of all, I didn't know that, so that's a hugely important contextual piece in Germany. And thank you for sharing that. That's super important. And this, what you say is so right about the stereotypes and misinformation, especially, I mean, maybe many years ago, mostly in Western northern countries, maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the people who were homeless were men who were drunkards, or, you know, like this. But who is, as you say, who's next? That's the point of your title, I think. For me, it's such a great, I love this title, because who's next? Just the other day, there was a big spread in a newspaper here in Canada about all these employed people who have now fallen into homelessness in Toronto, because it's so expensive, and there's just, you know, people can't manage with the pandemic and underemployment, and so they're employed one week and then not the next, and then they can't pay their rent and they're out. And so the idea that homelessness is about people with drug addictions, that's who's homeless. And so many people I've met living in homelessness around the world say that they never had a psychosocial disability, any kind of mental health issues, until they hit the streets. And of course, I mean, if any one of us imagines, I sometimes do this, I'll sit in my office and I just close my eyes. I try to imagine living on the street for 24 hours. I just try to imagine. I cannot. I cannot. Of course, you're going to take drugs to numb yourself from the realities of your very rough life. So there's a lot of work for us to do. And I think Who's Next is a really important piece in this, as you say, to popularize this, to get it out there. 20,000 people now know more about homelessness thanks to you. It's really important. Bit by bit, we will change the world.
Thank you. That's a very nice, let's say, closing. I mean, we're from our angle, from like as an architecture museum, we're trying to really make the world a little bit a better place to be, and bring in also into the minds of our architecture students that architecture is an ethical and is a kind of a social discipline. It's not about the form is at the end very important, and it's also about ethics and aesthetics. That's our goal, that we get that out. And so I think if there are not any other questions from the audience, I don't think so. I really want to thank you so much for this very engaged lecture, for your really strong words. I mean, this is what we need also to move people forward, to think about and reflect about it, and not just to suppress it and to say, yeah, this is not my business. Daniel, any other comments?
Well, if you're watching live and you're in Munich, the exhibition closes this Sunday. So there's still a chance to see it. We luckily will open it again in October in the Kunst und Gewerbe und Kunstmuseum in Hamburg, and it will be open there for 6 months. And also invite you to get the catalog, because that's another outlet for us. The book will survive the building, as we know. And there's 8 essays, original essays, that are not in the exhibition, the foreword of Leilani. So we hope that will continue to be another way of reaching a larger audience with our effort. Thank you so much, Leilani, Andres, and Sarah.
A real pleasure. Thank you both.
See you soon. Thank you.